Hey everybody, the GOT show is back. As you probably know, if you've listened to this podcast before, about 6 weeks ago, Jason moved on to a different pastime, as it were, and I decided to take a little bit of break, find a new co-host, and I've been super fortunate to get my good friend Marino Taylor II to join me. Marino, I go way back from when he was my boss when I was a volunteer organizer for the Democratic Party, and he was doing stuff for the state party. But one of the best parts, or one of the driving reasons why I thought Marino would be the perfect co-host for this podcast, is that he's had a variety of careers and experiences in politics that give him a perspective that most people don't have. So I'm super excited. We're going to have a conversation today instead of an interview with somebody coming in from outside. I'm just going to interview Marino and get to know him a little bit so that you understand where he's coming from and what you can expect going forward. Marino Taylor II. Please say hello to our guests.
Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Look forward to getting to know each and every one of you and sharing some of my experiences from my time throughout my career up to this point. So it'll be a fun ride. And as always, feel free to send any questions this way.
You betcha. With that, I'm Chris Savage. I'm here with my new co-host, Marino Taylor II, and this is the GOT MFB show. Marino, as I said in the intro, the driving reason why I asked you to be this co-host, and you were the only person I asked, you were the first person that came to my mind, is because you've got this sort of varied background in terms of what you've done in politics, and I just think you bring a perspective that most people don't have. So let's just start out by what's your background and what prepared you for the work that you do today?
Again, pleasure to be here, Chris, and I appreciate the invite. So I'm from Detroit, Michigan, born and raised. Did my bachelor's and master's at Eastern Michigan University. So I actually got my start in academia. I was a graduate assistant in the management department there, had a lot of fun working with the staff there. And from there, I got a call from a friend who's one of my best friends. His older brother was planning to run for state house. At the time, I didn't know a ton about state politics, but growing up in Detroit, you always kind of have a sense of local politics. The one thing I will say is the reason that it was so appealing to me is both of my parents are from Highland Park, Michigan. Okay. And so when I found out that he was looking to run and to represent that area, I was like, you know what, this will be a great opportunity after me being away for 6-7 years to get back in touch with my roots. So decided to take him up on that offer. Had an amazing time organizing. The very first door I knocked, I think that's when I knew this was for me.
For some people, that's the opposite response.
I know. Definitely agree. It was just kind of one of those interactions where, I've always considered myself to be very social, despite the fact that I'm actually an introvert, believe it or not.
I do not believe that, but go ahead.
So knocked on my first door. The interaction was very positive. I understood that there was a need and maybe this was something that I could do. So we did have a successful campaign. I actually ended up working in the Michigan House in his office for a year. Nice. Did a lot of the community engagement work, constituent relations. This was at the time of the recession, actually. So a lot of my work was helping folks keep their lights on and save their homes from tax foreclosure. And I still tell people to this day that was one of the most rewarding jobs that I had, because at the end of the day, you could always go home and say, I did something to help someone. Exactly. From there, I went on to be an organizer for the House Dem Caucus, mostly in the urban, non-targeted areas, where there's going to be Democrats. So,
gotcha.
Went on to be a policy analyst there. And one of the things I will say is, once I got to Lansing and working in a legislative office, I realized how few people there were there that looked like me. And so that was one of the things.
Spoiler alert, Marino is black. I don't know if you can see that through this podcast, but that would probably help you out.
And, that was one of the drivers for me is I want to stay here and make sure that there's more people that look like me before I leave.
Gotcha.
So I would see, different individuals, whether they be elected officials, business leaders, lobbyists. And eventually I saw a gentleman by the name of Gregory Eaton, the Godfather, and I was like, I want to be that guy.
Okay.
And so from there I set out to pretty much learn everything I could about the legislative process here in Michigan and how that works. And that's kind of sort of reflected in my background is, so I left from the Michigan House Democratic Caucus, went over to be a nonprofit lobbyist for a local government organization. Spent 2 years there lobbying on behalf of counties and county commissioners. From there, went over, tried to move back home and get back in touch with my roots again. Went over to the private sector for a little bit, but ended up Lansing calling me back.
Dragging you back in.
And
Nice.
ended up working for a bipartisan consulting firm for a few years. Unfortunately, this was around the time when there wasn't a lot of money flowing into Democrats at the time. I did a lot of my work in the nonprofit sector around pension protection. Criminal justice reform was something that I worked heavily on at that time. And then from there, me personally, I hate losing. And so it was around that time, I want to say this was probably right before the 2016 election, and, everything was going on, and I knew I just had to get involved. So I took a position with the Democratic Party doing some GOTV work here in Washtenaw County, and that's where we met.
Yep.
Great experience. I wish I was on the ground a little sooner.
Yes.
We worked together for about 2 months, I think, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. But from there, I knew this was for me. I have to, see this through. I, again, hate losing. So that the taste that left in my mouth, and I'm sure, I'm not the only one. It drove me to continue down that road. So from there, I went on to be a regional political organizer, eventually working on Project 83 here in Southeast Michigan and across 8 counties across the southern border. And then deputy field director for the 2018 coordinated campaign here in Southeast Michigan as well. It was a pleasure working with the one campaign, helping to build a tremendous machine, over 50 offices, over 100 staffers.
So for people that don't know that, the coordinated campaign, or what became known as the one campaign, is a campaign that, or it's a coalition basically of all the candidates that are running at the top of the ticket and somewhat below that, so that we're all pulling the rope in the same direction, using same messaging, hopefully coordinating resources so that, we're not wasting anything.
Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Yeah, so that's, and that's, sometimes coordinated campaign is a misnomer because it's neither really coordinated nor much of a campaign, but I would say in the last several cycles, it's been more effective.
Oh yeah, definitely. And one thing's for sure, it's always an experience. And if you're
never seen twice either.
If you're in organizing, it's something you probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, you've got personalities, you've got these candidates who are type A's all the way. You've got your bosses at the party, and then you've got all the people that are underneath you who you're directing. And then you've got the grassroots, people who are out knocking on the doors, and you've got to keep all those people happy and pulling the rope in the same direction. It's very, very challenging in that regard.
It's a lot of juggling.
And this happens in every state, right? I mean,
I would think so, of course. I hope.
Yeah, I hope so. Exactly right.
And lastly, most recently, I was a multi-client lobbyist in Lansing, working, representing multiple interests. Wayne County was one of the clients that I represented. Being a Detroit kid, that was like a dream come true. Yeah. It was an experience, of course. It was good to be back on the policy side of things in Lansing again. But again, I kind of look at things and, there's unfinished business, and for me, there's probably nothing that's going to satisfy me until
we've got the whole thing, right?
Finish line.
Nice. So, I mean, of all the things, so you've done this wide variety of things, everything from lobbying to policy analyst, as a policy analyst, and organizing and all this stuff. What grabs you the most?
I think the one thing that I enjoy most, of course, aside from interacting with people, because I am for some reason, just a social creature, is trying to help break down these extremely complex policies into language and examples that everyday people can understand. And we don't do enough of that, I think. And I think you kind of see that going on in this debate right now with the budget bill in D.C.
Right.
Is, we can get lost in the sauce, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to take these 1,000-page documents and put it into some sort of form that people can comprehend and understand. Yeah,
explain yourself. So one of the conversations that I've been eager to have with you is what it's like for a person of color to work in what has been, sadly, and I don't understand it, but a very white infrastructure for the most part, whether it's the Democratic Party or even progressive groups. And I want to have a bigger discussion about, being quote unquote black in the Democratic Party. And that can mean as somebody who is an organizer or somebody who is a staffer or even just as a voter. And I guess the overarching question I have is, how does being a black person impact how people perceive you and interact with you when you're working within sort of those 3 buckets of the Democratic Party?
I think it really depends on the individual, I'd say. There's unfortunately a lot of people who, haven't really had a lot of interactions with people of different races and backgrounds. And I think that's something that just as a society that we need to work on. But getting to that point where you're working within the party and being an African American, I do think that comes with some pressures, especially if you're working within the African American community. So you're definitely going to hear it from any and everybody, which, is a good thing. I mean, you want feedback, solicited and many times unsolicited, about how we can do better and the things that we need to do better to increase engagement within the African American community. It's kind of a love-hate relationship at times, I would say, of course, because one of the things I'll say about the Democratic Party and just being really involved in politics is there aren't many industries, sectors that you can work in where, you can rise as fast as you can, as in politics. So, I've seen a lot of folks who can
if
put
you're
in.
good.
Exactly.
Well, not always just that, but
not always. There's definitely people who get up there that maybe shouldn't, but that's something else. But I would say, there's folks who can put in 5-10 years of solid work, and you will see them at levels where it may take you 20, 30, 40 years to get to in corporate America. And so I definitely think that it's one of those, it's a vehicle, and we as the African American community have this vehicle that we can choose to use or not. It has traditionally been a vehicle for African Americans to express our desires and our priorities. I don't necessarily believe that that's always heard. And, we're doing a lot better, I would say, than we have in the past in terms of engagement within the community. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that I used to get all the time on doors is, why do you guys just show up right before an election?
Right.
And one thing I will with certainty will say is that the Democratic Party nationwide, but specifically here in Michigan, is doing a much better job of year-round organizing. And that definitely helps come election time when folks don't think you're just showing up to get their vote.
That's what Project 83 is all about, right?
Exactly.
In Michigan is an effort to just be, on the ground talking to voters and all the time.
And Project 83, really came from Resistance Summer, which was the DNC project where they brought together organizers from all around the country, to basically get back to grassroots organizing. It was a week-long training. Thankfully, the Michigan Democratic Party showed up with Project 83 in hand.
Nice.
We really kind of spent a lot of our time trying to tell other people how we put this together and that they should look at it, because that precinct level organizing that the Michigan Democratic Party put into play has really changed the game.
Yeah, and I think it really is. It's a testament to putting organizers in charge of groups like that. So you've got Lavore Barnes, for example, in Michigan, who's our chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, and she has got a heart of an organizer from way back. In Wisconsin, for example, Ben Wickler, who is formerly from Move On, and he's done tons of organizing himself, and the results really are showing. And you talk about Project 83. I'm in contact with our Project 83 coordinator here all the time, and they're really getting it done. It's really important. One of the interesting things that I've got several friends who have, as you said, ascended rather rapidly through into higher office because there are opportunities here for African Americans to do that, and they have communication issues, I guess, to put it lightly, with people who are sort of their constituents, and they sometimes view them as having gotten too important to them, and they're no longer either black enough or not representing their goals. Do you run into that at all?
I definitely think that's something that as an African American you will always run into as you sort of climb the ladder. It's unfortunately just one of the things that is incumbent upon us is to remain grounded, stay humble, stay in touch with your roots. One thing I always used to tell elected officials once they got to Lansing is don't forget the people who got you here.
You bet.
Sometimes folks do end up unfortunately spending too much time outside of their community, and people notice that.
Yeah.
You can't hide the fact that you're sending a staff member to all of these meetings. You're not showing up yourself.
Yeah.
And with the advent of social media, people talk. And it spreads like wildfire. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of the folks who you depend on to vote for you.
Do you feel like the Democratic Party is finally getting its shit together in terms of I mean, you kind of alluded to this, but not showing up in, just right before the election, and also to actually seeking out, input from communities of color and other, not just communities of color, but marginalized communities, for example. I've got women friends who are in, in the House legislative side and also in, various staff positions. And even they're not the minority. I mean, they're actually the majority. Women are, but they still are a marginalized population because of the way America is. And their feedback to me is that, they're still not getting heard, even though they're rising into positions of influence and where they're in charge of other people and stuff. Do you think we're getting better at that? Is the Democratic Party, kind of waking up to, we have to value all these people?
Yes, I would definitely say so. I think the more important thing, we can talk till we're blue in the face. The most important thing I would say in the next few cycles is that we must start to deliver. I don't care how big or how small, but we have to start delivering for the folks who continue to bust their backs and, make sure that people get out and vote year after year. We make promises, there's priorities, we understand, we know what they are. And, we can continue to have these conversations because, of course, things do change. But we have to start delivering for our base or we're really going to start seeing, I think, some of that erode away a little bit. Especially now that I think more so than anything, people are keeping score in a more organized fashion of, the promises that are made, when they're made, and whether or not they are followed through on.
It's interesting. I think that conversation's going on nationally right now with this Build Back Better plan because, started out at $4 trillion or more, and it's been slowly whittled away now till it's less than $2 trillion. But the question is it worth giving up some things that you really want to have in order to make some progress on some important things that will change lives? And I think my personal opinion is, something's better than nothing in all cases. And if you get nothing at the end of the day, you've not made that change, and then you're still the do nothing party. And I think that's a problem.
For sure. And I can't, say that there probably wasn't some skepticism there from the Black community to begin with, but you definitely have to shoot for the moon and, hopefully we'll reach the stars in terms of delivering something for, the base of the party.
I do think that, when you're talking about issues that impact everybody, like climate change, for example, sometimes it's when your biggest issue is, the availability of jobs or the crumbling infrastructure in your formerly industrial city, whether you're in Detroit or Flint or Benton Harbor or wherever you are, it's hard to see climate as being a big thing. And so do you think we run into that problem that, everybody's got their own special thing that's most important to them, and how do you navigate, what's most important on the big whole? What are we willing to give up? And, do people in marginalized communities, are they the ones that are always getting their thing given up?
Yes.
I guess that's
unfortunately,
question,
I would love to push back on that, but I think unfortunately, yes. Yeah. And not only that, I think we must do a better job of maybe messaging around climate change to communities of color in particular. I know here in Michigan, we just have so many examples that we can point to. Right. Like you said, whether it be crumbling infrastructure in Benton Harbor, we had the same situation in Flint. In the Southeast Michigan, particularly Detroit area now, you have the flooding from these major storms, which I think is something that you can directly tie to climate change.
Yeah.
You have climate change, you have infrastructure. That is how you talk to the folks who are dealing with these issues. But you can't just continue to say climate change is important. Climate change is important. You have to break it down further, look at each specific community, constituency, and find a way to maybe tie it to what they're experiencing, as opposed to just passing out a flyer, knocking doors and saying, hey, we're fighting for climate change because
means nothing to those people.
Excuse me, I'm in the middle of, cleaning 3 feet of water out of my basement.
Exactly right.
And we missed
not connecting those dots.
We missed that opportunity right there.
I think Rashida Tlaib does a great job of that. She famously has the most dirty zip code in her district. It's a community that's literally like wrapped around a Marathon refinery, and I've been down in that area, and it is dirty. Everywhere you go, even where there is nothing anymore because it's a brownfield, even those places are just intolerable, and the air there is terrible. And if you're trying to raise a kid there, good luck. It's so hard. The schools are not good. And the unfortunate thing that I've witnessed is that in those communities, it's hard to cultivate new leaders because, you the educational foundation is not there to get kids up to the point where they can, take a leadership position, for example. And so you're relying on other things to help them along with that. And that is not a for sure thing.
That's an interesting conversation because I think this is something that a lot of different orgs or institutions need to maybe focus on in terms of identifying leadership. There are criteria, there's things that we can say, you must have these, or this is, what makes a leader. But in marginalized communities, there's different ways to tap into and identify leadership. There's young people on the ground every day. There's hardworking individuals. They may not have the specific set of criteria that you're looking for, but they are on the ground in that community, organizing individuals. They may not call themselves leaders, but it takes someone to take a step back and say, okay, who in this community is moving priorities forward? Who is at least bringing awareness to issues? Once you identify those people, you kind of have to look at them through a different lens. You can't say,
you bet. Not using traditional metrics to judge them.
And not only that, once you identify them, who's worth investing in? Is this something that is going somewhere? And I think there's a lot of people, if we start to break down some of those, old ways that we think of leadership, that we can identify. And ironically, I think a lot of these people are coming to our attention despite the fact that we're not doing anything.
Yeah, right. It's not because of, but despite of. I'll take a kid who sees a corner lot that's run down and full of junk, but wants to play ball there, getting a bunch of his friends or her friends together and cleaning that up and then making it a place where they can spend some time. I'll take that as an organizer. That's the kind of thing you're looking for, is somebody who can get other people to help you do something.
Exactly.
That's really what organizing is all about.
Someone who can take initiative,
Right.
Whether or not they have the resources, the know-how, they're going to figure it out. And they may fail one time, they may fail 3 times, but they're not going to stop.
Yeah.
And those are the people that I want. I will walk through
exactly.
a brick wall.
If they can get it done in those conditions,
Exactly.
Give them the resources they need, and they can do amazing things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about representation, and this goes whether it's political leadership or organizational leadership. It's more than just a catchphrase, because you see time and again where somebody like, say, for example, Stacey Abrams or Ilhan Omar, or just people who are non-traditional. They're not white men, basically, non-traditional politicians or leaders, giving a vision to young people that, hey, I can do that. Maybe it was a young black boy who saw you as part of, the organizing that you've done and said, hey, maybe I can do that. Maybe it's not out of the realm of possibility. Do you think we, as a progressive community in general and as the Democratic Party, do enough to make sure that we've got representation of all the different types of, people that there are out there? Demographics, I guess, is the fancy word for it.
Yes. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
I definitely think that we're doing a much better job than we have in the past. Again, the last few cycles, you have seen a dramatic change, a 180, so to speak, in terms of how the party engages the community. Again, the year-round organizing, I think, is something that is just going to change not only what's happening here on the ground in Michigan, but nationwide. You're really starting to see fruit from that. And I think we'll have this conversation later, but the year-round organizing is really going to help in terms of getting more Democrats onto local elected and non-elected positions.
Right, cough school board, and all the other places.
The other thing I think we're doing a much better job of is hiring organizers to work within their own communities. I know early when I first started, we'd always have a ton of energetic, youthful individuals come in from outside of the state, and they'd send them down into Detroit to go organizing, and I'd enjoy hearing the stories that they had about knocking doors in Detroit,
right.
Being from all over the rest of the country. Now I think we have really understood the value of building up and hiring from within the community. So if I want an organizer who's going to help me turn out Detroit, finding someone who's from Detroit,
right?
Finding someone who's from Flint, Ann Arbor, Battle Creek, Benton Harbor, Flint. We have energetic folks all across the state, all across the country. And not only that, it's so much easier to get buy-in from the community. And if I'm your neighbor or from around the corner, when I knock on your door to engage you in a conversation, you're more likely to talk to me and stay at the door for longer. Versus, if I look out the window and I see someone that doesn't look like me, I may not answer. So definitely doing a much better job there. I think no constituency is a monolith. So as an African American, I would say one thing, in terms of the party, we have to just message better. African Americans are not a monolith. Yeah. We don't all go to church. Yep. We're not all poor. These common stereotypes of, when we're talking about policies that will benefit African Americans tend to always sound like all black people are poor.
Yeah.
And that's just not, the case. So, I think if we just kind of pull back, and I think, again, we're doing a much better job of trying to remove a lot of these biases. And when you have people of color in these higher positions who are helping to make these decisions, I think you're more likely to catch some of these mistakes that slip through the cracks sometimes.
I 100% agree with you about the transformation. And my perspective is here in Washtenaw County in Michigan, but I got involved in politics for the first time during the Obama campaign, and as you said earlier, you quickly rise through the ranks if you show any kind of aptitude or interest in it and energy for it and time for it. And I was working with kids that were and they were literally kids. These are people in their 20s, mostly from Iowa and from Indiana. I mean, they didn't know. We had to tell them where to go in Washtenaw County. They didn't know, and that's just being replicated in place after place. I would say starting in about 2012 and beyond, that started to change a lot. Even with the Obama campaign in 2012, they started hiring more local people to run offices and be regional field directors and things like that. And it has made a huge difference. And it's made a huge difference in terms of building the party too, because these are people who, they get elevated to a position of influence in managers, basically organizers, and then they stay in the community when they leave, when the campaign's over. And now you've got this body of trained, and energetic, usually young people who have proven that they're good organizers, and it's a remarkable thing. So I really see that going on. I don't know what is going on in other states. I know what's happening here in Michigan intimately. And I really do hope that the lessons that we've learned here by hiring an organizer like Lavora Barnes, giving her the resources that she needs to just take this to a statewide level, I just hope that's happening elsewhere, because I just think it's so important.
The other thing I guess I would just touch on is, investing in the grassroots orgs and community groups that are already doing the work. The one thing that, you'd hate to see is, the party try to come in and overshadow good work that's already being done, because then that sometimes creates resentment within the community. So I think trying to make sure that you're tapping into the infrastructure that's already on the ground and building them up, that's always going to be a plus for the party. And then, something that I think we're seeing a lot more of, especially in terms of candidate representation, is just having better socioeconomic diversity within the marginalized groups. So, 20, 30 years ago, if you had an African-American elected official within the party, 9 times out of 10, they were probably much better off than the community that they were representing.
Yeah.
Now I think you're starting to see more moms. You're seeing waitresses. You're seeing everyday individuals, teachers running for office, representing the community, and having those type of candidates who people can look to and say, hey, that looks just like me, or that could be me.
That could be me, or my kid, or whatever.
It increases that morale at the grassroots level. You're going to see more people say, hey, why not me? As opposed to, only, people with a lot of money or lawyers or this or that can, run for office.
Yeah, interesting. Just locally, anecdotally here, we're in a tiny village called Dexter. It's mostly white, not exclusively, but mostly. But as an local organizer for the Democratic Party here, right after the election of Donald Trump, when the indivisible groups sprang up and some of these other sort of what Debbie Dingell often refers to as third-party validator groups, they're aligned with you, but they're not part of you. I got involved with these groups just because I wanted to see, what was happening. And a lot of leadership was bubbling up. And it's kind of like you were talking about earlier, where you can show leadership in a whole bunch of different ways. And sometimes it's organizing a library, reading book group or book reading group, or maybe it's organizing, your neighborhood to do some project. But there are leadership skills that cross all of these different things that can also play a role in politics. And I watched that happen in the local Indivisible group here in Dexter. Is a variety of mostly middle-aged women who had never been involved in politics before had gotten incensed by the election of Donald Trump, really for the first time politically engaged, and started to put these skills that they had learned doing other things as moms and as teachers or whatever, and community members, putting them to work for politics. Mm-hmm. And I knew at that point that coming in there as the county party and sort of putting our Bigfoot stamp on it and saying, hey, you should come and do this. The approach that I took, and it seems to have been worked pretty well here. I don't know if it would translate to other places, but was just to come in and say, okay, we will help you advertise or promote your events. We will, we can get volunteers from our area to come in, help you have a bigger showing of people. And when election times comes, which is going to be in a year and a half, if you want to get involved, we have these resources that we can help you take a bigger role and have a bigger impact. And a lot of these people now are organizers for the county party here because they brought them, they elevated themselves really at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then we were able to give them the resources they need to take it to the next step. And it's had such a big impact. And again, having organizers that are based in the community is just such a critical element to it.
I have a perfect follow-up for that, actually. Working in the Southeast Michigan area, one thing, we talk a lot about the different constituency groups. One that's often overlooked is the thriving Indian community here. And I remember during the 2018 campaign, we were having some trouble really, connecting with this group. And we contacted a group called Samosa. And they specialize in communicating with the Indian community in Canton, Plymouth, Northville, and Oakland County as well, Novi, Troy. Okay. And so what we did was sit down with them and try to figure out the best way that we could help them target their own community, because they understood the need to speak to the community and figure out ways to get them more involved, or at least ensure that they voted. And so we worked with them on how to specifically target and maybe put together a list of so they could go door to door or make calls to individuals within the Indian community. And when I tell you that worked out so much better than us struggling, trying to, again, right. Myself being a black man, yourself being a white man, or right. Anybody else trying to knock on the door and hold a conversation. But having someone from their own community come talk to them, we were able to get much better turnout, increased participation. And I can tell you right now that group is still going strong.
That's great. Nice. So one final thing I want to talk to you about in terms of your experience is the challenge that we have of getting people engaged who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. And I'm not talking about just black people, obviously. I'm talking about anybody who is, paying bills week to week. And these are people who don't have any political power for the most part, generally. I mean, you don't really hear about any major constituency groups that are, except for, maybe poverty groups, but that's rare, and they're usually not the people that are in there. And the challenge that organizers all across this country, and I hear people talk about this all the time, is we just can't get them involved. They don't show up to vote. They don't want to get involved with our party. They don't do one of the And when you go out and it might be like here in in Ypsilanti, for example, which is a very large population of black people. Even black leaders there have a difficult time organizing black people. And what it really came, it didn't dawn on me, but it became really evident to me several years ago, is that it's really hard to organize people who have literally no spare time in their life. It is literally a privilege of free time. And I don't think we understand that well a lot of times when we're doing organizing. And I don't know how to address it, because I can't create free time in somebody's life if they're working 3 jobs and they've got kids and, they're just trying to get, the lights on and food on the table and pay all the bills. And what are your thoughts on this? I mean, is there a better way than what we're doing to engage people like that, so that at the very least they vote for their own interests, which is hopefully what, the Democratic Party represents, or, and take the next step if they have the time to get more involved themselves politically?
That is a terrific question, and something that, I've definitely experienced and struggled with in my time organizing. I think one of the things we have to do a better job of course, is just managing our data as we contact folks on doors, phones, whatever, making sure that we're leaving accurate information. One thing that I don't think we ask folks enough is what's the best way to communicate with you. Some folks prefer door, some folks prefer email, some folks prefer phone.
Yeah.
If I am an individual who is, honestly, there's a lot of folks who are just struggling to get by, day to day.
I get it.
And, we have to understand that pain and the struggle that comes with that. And I think you mentioned it in terms of just not having free time to volunteer and knock doors or make phone calls or all of the things that we ask of citizens. If someone, tells you that they don't have time or they can't, I think we need to, again, do a better job of managing that data so that we're not constantly blowing their phone up, knocking on their door.
Right. Making them feel guilty for not doing something they can't do.
Can create resentment, of course, and that'll lose you a voter. More than, giving you an opportunity to gain a voter. Not only that, people vote, and, that is the bare minimum, I think, sometimes that we ask of folks, but we do have to make sure, again, in managing data, that we know when people are returning their ballots or if they're going to vote absentee or if they do plan to vote day of, so that, again, we're not constantly badgering people, because I think that's one of the things, especially around election time, that you hear a lot of, because it's not just the party. There's a ton of outside groups that are involved. There's actors from out of state that make phone calls. There's just constant touches, which of course we know increases participation. But for someone who doesn't have that ability, it doesn't sit well. And I can be honest, there's people who probably want to do more and know that they can't, whether they're working, taking care of children, taking care of their elders, just literally trying to balance their daily needs. We have to make sure that we're not stepping on their toes and doing a better job of managing data so that we send folks out with an understanding of what community they're going to, when they're going. Why are we knocking at this time? Oh, because we know that this community, people are probably not at work at this time, or this is a day off. There's a lot of things that I don't think that we take the time to consider when we do Canvas trainings. Everybody's not, especially think about the night shift worker, who maybe just got home.
Woke me up in the prime of my sleep time.
There's a lot of factors that, of course, we can't take into account until we know. But once we have that information, we have to make sure that we're actually utilizing it to the best of our abilities.
I think it requires us as organizers we have to appreciate this. We have to understand that there is such a thing as time privilege. And when people look at, even here in Washtenaw County, which is probably one of the most progressive, probably the most progressive county possibly outside of Wayne in the state. And, people are like, all of your organizers are white, Why is that? You've got, giant pockets of communities of color. Why don't you have more of those people involved? And that was a question that kept coming up early as in my role as a leader at the local county party. And it's taken me time to appreciate that, those people don't have the time to do that. And so you end up filling your ranks of organizers with white people who are largely wealthy people, because they don't have to have a job all the time. They don't have to work 2 different jobs just to keep the rent paid. And so we have to be creative in terms of, like you said, finding out when's the best time and the best manner to communicate with them. Presumably you've developed a message that would resonate with those folks. And then be creative about how you can provide them with opportunities to get involved that don't, take them away from the realities of their life, but also give them an opportunity to be heard. And if you're not out there getting active, a lot of times you just don't have a voice. And that's the catch-22, is that you want to have a voice, but you don't have the time, so you can't get a voice. And that's, I think that, those of us who have the privilege of time, it's on us to create opportunities for them to get involved and get engaged and to elevate them to positions where their voices are heard. And so that's my philosophy of organizing.
And had I not got that call from my friend to invite me to co-work on this campaign, I probably would not have been as exposed to organizing either. And I think that's one thing that we maybe have to do a better job of in the Black community, is just exposing our youth to these opportunities, especially when there's paying opportunities out there. I will say that's one of the things that, I think marginalized communities also maybe look at in a different way is when you're constantly asking me to volunteer, but we're not also getting the opportunities for the paid positions when those are out there. So, exposing folks to grassroots organizing at an earlier age, I think will definitely be beneficial. And it's something that we focused on when I was at the party. We did hold an event in Detroit for youth to kind of talk about what was going on at that time. Had terrific turnout. DeRay McKesson came out and spoke.
Nice.
The lieutenant governor was there as well. I often think back to, whether or not one of those kids that attended that event may be active organizing now in the city. So
I'll bet there are a couple kids out there that were there.
I hope they took a tidbit away from that.
You bet. That's awesome. Speaking about Detroit, and I know I said I had the last question, but I have another one. So I went down and attended the Republican Party's launch of their community engagement office, and Rand Paul came in and launched that. I don't know if you were around during that point, but they launched this thing in downtown Detroit practically. Giant event full of white people. I think there were like 4 black people there. How is the Republican Party doing when it comes to organizing communities of color? Do they even try?
That's a terrific question. They are definitely trying. I'm actually aware of individuals within the city who are, giving it their best shot. I actually used to get mistaken for one, ironically. Not that we're black men that look alike, but at one point I was like, okay, maybe I can see it, but no.
I'm trying to remember the name of the guy that ran that particular office.
They are trying for sure, and I think that. Like I said, until we really start delivering on some of the promises that we make to the African American community, that there's going to be opportunity for the Republican Party to kind of chip away a little bit.
We leave the door open.
And I think we saw that in the 2016 election with Donald Trump, is that they were able to kind of chip away a little bit of the black male vote. So, we have our work cut out for us. And I think that we just have to be very mindful of the way that we engage with all of the different constituencies, the promises that we make, and keep track of whether or not we are actually delivering on those promises before we go back and start making more grander promises.
You betcha. All right. Well, are there any specific topics you're looking forward to diving into in the next over the next month or months coming up?
Oh man, I think there's so many things we'll have fun touching on. Talking about building the grassroots democratic infrastructure and, ways that we can prepare organizers for other positions within the political establishment so that we're not just constantly burning through staffers when we could be, funneling them into areas that we have need in, whether it be fundraising, financial accounting, or compliance. There's all kinds of positions that, I think we can help people prepare for while they're in
the farm league, as
involved.
It were.
Exactly. Local politics, of course.
Nice.
I think we should definitely touch on the whole debate around the labor shortage from COVID,
quote unquote,
or the rush to getting back to normal, which I think is just a mistake. And, just kind of next gen organizing and how politics is adapting to the times. And one thing I really do look forward to debating and talking about is we're so divided racially, or racial divide is always the topic of conversation. I want to talk about the socioeconomic divide and how that's somewhat overlooked in all of the conversations.
All right. Well, I am really looking forward to it. Welcome to the team. I think the opportunities here are boundless, and we've got it's going to be a lot of fun doing this. So welcome on into the team, and we'll be talking again every week.
Thanks for having me, folks. Take care.
With that, I'm going to turn it over. We're going to move to our next segment, our regular segment, now that we're back with Jordan Zachrin and Progressives Everywhere. It is now time for Progressives Everywhere with Jordan Zachrin. Jordan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to be back on the show, the relaunch, and glad it's going on, and that I can steal a little time.
You bet. Well, I'd like to introduce you to our new co-host, Marino Taylor. Marino, meet Jordan Zachrin.
Jordan, how are you? Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I'm glad you're on board and that that you guys are resuming, and excited to see what comes from it.
You betcha. Oh, yeah. So before we get going, since we're sort of relaunching here, maybe you could tell listeners what you do for your day job and what Progressives Everywhere is, which is not necessarily your day job.
Yes, so it's related to, but it's not my full day job. So what I do for a living right now is I agitate and get bosses angry. So I work for a newish organization called More Perfect Union. It was started by Faz Shakir, who is the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders in 2020, and as well as worked for a number of other luminaries in Washington. And we create media that empowers working people. That's literally the tagline for the company.
Very
but
cool.
we cover a lot of issues that affect working people, whether it's strikes. We've had cameras out on the picket lines lately. We just had people there for
Striketober.
Yeah, Striketober for Marty Walsh's appearance in Lancaster, which didn't get much a ton of news coverage, so we're playing it up. The fact that he went out there and did that. We've been covering, like I said, strikes everywhere, looking at policy, working with doing stories on the people trying to organize at Starbucks and Amazon, and really kind of playing into what's happening across the country with working people rising up. In addition to advocating for certain policies, right? We're looking at bank mergers, we're looking at whether it's paid leave or other things. So it kind of runs the gamut. But the point being that we are, I would say, like the economic populist, or we got our eyes on working people for the not for the Democratic Party. We've got people who used to work in the Democratic Party with us, but we will push Democrats the same way we will push anyone else.
All right, terrific. And then maybe just a bit about Progressives Everywhere, what you're doing with it now, and what you do during election years and that type of thing.
Yeah, so Progressives Everywhere started as a little newsletter in my studio apartment, and now it's a little newsletter in my one-bedroom apartment.
Nice.
It is, so what we do is I want to, and what I do during election years is spotlight progressive candidates running across the country, up and down the ballot, local elections, state elections, really focusing on legislative elections and, county and city elections like that, some congressional elections, and, interview them, trying to get their message out there. I can tell you more than ever working on the political side of the media, these things just don't get told. These stories don't get told. And we saw during the Obama era, there was a lot of good things he did as president, but not, helping out state parties is not one of them. There's a lot of land lost, turned red. So that's been a big focus of mine, trying to help candidates, but more than that, like organizations, nonprofits, grassroots activists, and in these off-year elections, rallying around different issues, looking at, there's still a lot of elections in cities and in counties in a couple states, and spotlighting, what's happening, because again, it's not getting covered, and trying to raise money and raise support for these organizations and candidates, and just kind of doing our best to get the word out.
And you're not afraid to go after sitting incumbents, are you?
I am not. No.
Okay. So what are we going to talk about this week?
We are going to talk about what's happening in Florida. Not Ron DeSantis inviting lots of COVID adult cops coming down, but it's another Ron DeSantis thing he did. I'm not a big
daily
fan of
with
the
that guy.
Yeah, not a big fan of that guy.
No.
So when Alcee Hastings, the late great representative, died in April, there was it should have been a special election. Ron DeSantis waited months and months to schedule one. And because of that, basically it meant that, and he scheduled it for November. So it basically meant that Democrats would be down a seat in the Senate, in the Congress, for almost an entire year. Not surprising. That's what Ron DeSantis does. So the primary is going to be in November, and the general election in January. That'll be pro forma. I mean, Democrats will win that. But his seat in Congress, for that, a lot of people decided to run for it. There's like 5 people running.
Okay.
I'm supporting one of them named Omari Hardy. He's a bit of an underdog because he doesn't have the millions that other candidates do, but he's good progressive, outspoken. And so he resigned, and so did 2 other people running for that seat, one in the state Senate and a couple in the state legislature. In Florida, you have to resign to run for a higher office.
Okay.
And so they officially resigned in August. But, they announced they were going to do it in like June and July. DeSantis has in the past, and it's the governor's job to call an election. DeSantis has in the past called an election day of resignations. Just let's get this thing going. It would have made most sense, certainly, to have an election in November, a special election when the other one was.
Right.
He just didn't do it. 3 months, 3 months has went by. And finally, one of the candidates, Omari Hardy, who's running, not Omari Hardy, sorry, Elijah, that's stuck in my mouth. This guy, Elijah Manley, he ran, he's like 22 years old. He's this like wonderkind. And he helped a bunch of residents file a lawsuit to force Ron DeSantis to actually declare these elections.
Okay.
As you might imagine, these 3 districts, they are majority black, they are low income, and they definitely are not mostly Ron DeSantis supporters.
Right. And not on top of his priority list, clearly.
Yes, not at all. And so it took like a good month or so. I reported about this. No, it took a good 2 weeks. I reported this on like October 14th when this happened. And finally, DeSantis didn't respond, didn't talk to the press. He hired lawyers. He was going to like start fighting it. And he decided, you know what? Instead of that, I'm going to make it as difficult as possible for these candidates. So he decided to schedule an election for January, including early voting starting in November.
Wow.
And so basically there's like very little campaigning going on.
Right.
This is in Senate District 33, House District 88, and House District 94.
Okay, so just so I understand, all these people had to resign to run for Congress, so there's now 3 vacancies in addition to the congressional vacancy, and he's trolling them by throwing in bullshit like this. Okay.
Yes, he's trolling them by basically refusing to call an election. And, Republicans have a vast lead in the state house. It's not like he was maintaining
I know. What is he afraid of?
this.
Seriously.
Yeah, he just did not want to give any help or allow even representation for these black communities. And the thing is, Florida's legislature goes from January to March. And so there was all this time that they were going to have a whole year without representation had he not scheduled it right now. They were up to up to the line.
Wow. Jeez. All right. So we have a special election in November and then another one in January, then an actual election in January.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Well,
yep.
Go Ron DeSantis.
God.
What he's done with his Surgeon General there is beyond the pale as well. That guy is.
What's wild is Ron DeSantis' wife has breast cancer also, in addition to, so what happened in the background is Ron DeSantis signed he nominated like an anti-vaxxer to Surgeon General.
Yeah.
And the Surgeon General showed up in the office of a lawmaker without a mask even.
Yep.
And this lawmaker has breast cancer, and he was defending it. Yeah. And Ron DeSantis' wife has breast cancer.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah.
Guy's shameless.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, it's good to talk to you again. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Sounds great.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us this week, folks. Thanks to Jordan Zachrin for coming on with Progressives Everywhere. We'll be back again with you next week with another episode of the GOT MFV Show. Bye-bye.
Some people will work. Some simply will not. But they'll complain and complain and complain and complain and complain. Like this, it's the saddest part.